Courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, a weekly show for basketball gamers and hardcore hoopheads. This is episode 558. I'm Andrew in our forum, Andrew NLSC on X. Joining me as always, my co-host Derek, Deep3 in the forum, and Deep3G and Deep384 on X. Derek, here we are once again with some thoughts to share with our fellow round ball enthusiasts, so please tip us off.
Yeah, so we're going to be recording a shorter episode today due to me being a little under the weather, but this episode is going to be all about the use of the three-point shot in basketball, not just the NBA. And we received many community responses related to this topic on, how they think they could fix the problem. It's no secret, Andrew, that the ratings for the NBA this year have been poor.
Way down.
Right. Way down. It's no secret that this is a trend that has been getting worse and worse over the last few years. People overall are just not enjoying watching the NBA product. And there's been a lot of podcasts out there. It's been talked about in the media. There's been articles written about it. And one of the glaring weaknesses in today's product is the fact that so many threes go up and there's not enough variety in the game. It feels like all the teams playing the same. It's not exciting basketball. The other things that are highlighted normally are the fact that, defenses are strapped by the rules. Defenses are handicapped. The offense has such a big advantage. Adam Silver is trying to drive up scores, etc. But the reason why I wanted to focus on this topic today is because of a comment that actually took place on the NLSC forum. And it was related to players shooting threes today and the amount of threes that they take. The user wrote, next they will introduce a 4-point shot or even 5, and players would make them on a regular basis. And it got me thinking about the whole topic of evolution, right? Where everybody's like, well, the game has evolved. Everybody's shooting threes. Everybody's shooting better from three. Centers are out there hitting threes at a high clip. Decades past, they couldn't shoot threes like this, etc. So I started doing some digging because I knew that the percentage wasn't higher this year than it was in many years past. So get this, Andrew. So from the regular 3-point line, teams are shooting 13.4 for 37.5 on the season from three. That's 35.9%. That's also, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, that's 24 3-point misses per game,
yes.
Right? So keep an eye on that percentage, 35.9%. In 99-2000, the 3-point percentage was 35.3%. 25 years ago, Andrew, roughly the same. 2000-2001, 35.4. 01-02, 35.4. 04-05, 35.6. 05-06, 35.8. 06-07, 35.8. 07-08, 36.2. Higher, Andrew. Higher 17 years ago. 08-09, 36.7. 09-10, 35.5. What do you notice there? The percentages have been the same for 25 years.
Consistent, yeah.
The only thing that's gone up is volume. Right? So obviously they're shooting more nowadays, but they're not shooting them better. So my point on that is teams and players are not shooting better 3-point percentage wise, even going back 25 years. They're shooting a higher volume and are still shooting an average of the same percentage, even with more lax defensive rules. This is context, Andrew, which includes no hand checking, landing space fouls, which discourage hard contests, and just the overall freedom of movement goal of the NBA. They're getting better looks at threes nowadays because of those lax defensive rules, because players have more blue sky from beyond the 3-point line and don't have to worry about somebody getting under their feet and doing a hard contest, etc. And there's on the perimeter, it's almost always hands off defense because they don't allow any form of hand checking or any form really of contact. And they're still shooting the same percentage that they were back in 99, 2000. So moving the line out or adding a 4 or 5 point line makes no sense from a talent standpoint. You would just see more bricks go up, and it would hurt the sport even more. I think that would cripple the sport, Andrew, if they did any of those things. But the talent in today's game, despite what everybody says about evolution, despite what everybody says about, oh, well, the players shoot more, they're shooting them better, and everybody can hit threes nowadays, it doesn't line up with the percentage, Andrew. How many times have you seen box scores this year where it's like 8 for 32, 10 for 40, 11 for 45, etc.? Like I stated, 24 misses on average from 3-point per team per game. What does 24 misses do, Andrew? Those are almost always long rebounds, right? Which a lot of times those 3-point attempts are bailing out the defense because most of the time they're early in the shot clock. And it also allows, with those long rebounds, for the opposition to get out and run. So many easy baskets happen on the other end, and so many fast breaks started because of these long misses. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on, quote unquote, moving the line out or adding a 4 or 5 point shot? I think it's absolutely silly, and it would cripple the sport.
I mean, you look at how the court has changed, the dimensions of the court have changed over the years, the widening the lane, etc., to account for larger players, more skilled players, and the dominance of players like George Mikan and Will Chamberlain back in the day. Of course, you look at the lane back then, it was very narrow, so that absolutely did need to widen. It wasn't an ideal design to begin with. I'm not a fan of adding a 4-point shot or a 5-point shot or necessarily changing the court dimensions like that. I think it really does come down to the philosophy of how 3-point shooting is approached these days. The analytics approach, obviously, analytics and algorithms, two of my pet peeves these days. And it's funny because you look back at a player like Allen Iverson, who was frequently criticized for being a volume shooter. Oh, he scores a lot of points, but he takes a lot of shots, and inefficiently. And Gilbert Arenas, of all players, and look, we've stated that we don't agree with a lot of things that Gilbert Arenas says. We've noted some of his bad takes, the supposed undersized players back in the 90s, not a thing, etc. But he made a great point recently, noting that teams are averaging around about the same amount of points as in high-scoring eras in years past, despite taking more threes. Now, if players were shooting threes efficiently these days, making more of them, shooting them better, then, in theory, a lot of teams, most of the teams, would be averaging 130 plus. Minimum, but that's not the case. They're still scoring the same amount of points on average as they were when the 3-point shot was not as much of a weapon as it is today, or the volume of threes is not as it was today. So I think that's actually a great point, that it's not being used efficiently, it's not boosting scoring, and the amount of misses, as you noted, just backs that up.
I'm getting so sick, Andrew, of Steph Curry being brought up in these conversations, because if every team had 12 Steph Currys,
sure,
right, in their rotation, then yeah, the league average for 3-point percentage would be in the 40s, right? And it would probably be a damn good strategy, right, to shoot a ton of threes, because, man, you got 12 Steph Currys on your team. But Steph Curry is the exception to the rule, Andrew.
One player.
Steph Curry is a freak of nature. If every NFL team in the 80s or whatever had a Dan Marino at quarterback, then all of the teams would have been in better shape and throwing getting 4,000 to 5,000 yards from their quarterback. Dan Marino was the exception to the rule, right? As far as a quarterback goes, he was an exceptional talent who was amazing at what he did. So saying that, well, Steph Curry and the Warriors were killing teams from the 3-point line, that means we have to integrate this at all levels of basketball. By the way, let's point that out, not just in the NBA, all levels of basketball.
Definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, this is the way the game is being taught now at the youth level. AAU, high school, college basketball is so hard for me to watch. Now, I mentioned that on a previous episode. But the point is that you can't base the entire direction of a league based on the performance of one team or specifically one player and whatnot. And it kind of gets me to a long comment that Careless XCI on our Discord stated. And this was a well thought out thing, so I'm going to read the whole thing in a second. But wouldn't you agree? It's like this whole thing of bringing up Steph Curry every time, as far as, this is why the rules change. This is why the league direction changed. This is why everybody is shooting threes. It is stupid. Like it drives me nuts.
Oh, it absolutely is. It's focusing on the anomaly and trying to normalize that and build strategy around it. And to your point, we have been talking about it in the Discord. And as I said there, imagine if you asked every big man to play like Shaq or Wilt. And not every big man has that kind of athleticism and strength, that combination, and skill, of course. Not every big man can play like that. Now there are
exactly. If you try to feed DeAndre Jordan like you did Shaq and tell DeAndre Jordan to do the things that Shaq did, you'd lose by 50 every game.
Absolutely.
60 every game.
Absolutely. And
exactly.
And even other great players. Patrick Ewing, for example, fantastic player, by no means a weak player, but he is not a Wilt-style player or a Shaq-style player as far as his style and his skill set and his physique. So you play to your strengths and your skill set, and you wouldn't ask players to do otherwise. And if you expand that to team strategies, look at the Triangle, Derek. The Triangle won 11 titles under Phil Jackson, and that would suggest that it is a pretty effective strategy. And indeed, the Warriors have used elements of the Triangle. Steve Kerr obviously playing under Phil Jackson for those 3 championships in Chicago. But you also look at the teams that Phil Jackson had. I mean, you've got MJ and Pippen. You've got Shaq and Kobe and Powell. You've got these great teams, these great duos that can carry out this strategy. Look, if the current Bulls adopted the Triangle, would it work? Would it be effective? Could it be a positive? Perhaps. But is it going to be as good as when MJ and Pip were running the Triangle? Absolutely not. So it does come down to the personnel you have and the skill sets, and you don't try to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Not just that. They tried to use the triangle when Phil Jackson was in New York, and they tried to use it with Carmelo Anthony. And how'd that work out? It didn't. The personnel on that Knicks team did not work for that strategy, right? They didn't have the players that could utilize that strategy appropriately and whatnot. So, no, that is a good point.
But it won 11 titles, Derek. So, by that theory, it should be the only way to play.
Yeah, think about that. Right, exactly. So, if every team ran the triangle, would it have been a success just because it was a success for the Bulls and the Lakers? Absolutely not. Exactly. Careless XCI, I want to get to his post here about the three-point shooting. He states, under the current set of rules, I don't see this trend changing anytime soon. I don't want to play devil's advocate, but at the end of the day, front offices and coaching staffs only care about quantitative output. Regardless of how a certain play is developing or who has the ball, it is generally easier to get a 33% look from 3 than a 50% look from 2. Although value-wise, both are worth the same. Also, shooting more threes has been arguably the main driver of all-time highs in average offensive rating and efficiency field goal percentage. So from a purely analytical standpoint, of course, the common strategy would be to shoot a lot of them. Nuance is obviously ignored. So I'm going to completely disagree with you about the generally easier to get a 33% look from 3 than a 50% look from 2. The paint has never been more open nowadays. Teams are trotting out small ball lineups constantly. Centers that are 6'8", 6'9", 6'6", sometimes. Players who are not great at protecting the rim. The defense is super handicapped, so usually drives oftentimes are very lightly contested or uncontested. I think that lane is a lot more open than you think, and those 50% looks, they can happen a lot more if teams drove to the hoop more. Also, like you stated, a 33% look from 3 is easier to get. When you take that look from 3, when you take that 33% look, and oftentimes it's early in the clock, what are you doing on that possession? You are bailing out the defense in a major way there, not having to work as hard. Most of the times they don't even need to box out because those are long rebounds. It takes the physicality out of the game. And honestly, it just resembles chucking. I played basketball my whole life, and when teams do this, we say they're chucking. And that's what it looks like in the NBA. It's a bunch of chuckers. And I see 80, 90, sometimes 100 threes go up in the game in the NBA. I see the large majority of those shots missing. That's chucking. So I don't think that saying it's an easy look to take that 33% shot and whatnot makes it in any way a good idea because those percentages are still low. And because it completely bails out the defense and allows easy baskets on the other end. So Careless continues. He says, overall, I really find it hard to believe that teams play the way they do simply because they are lazy and don't want to play hard. They do it this way mainly because the three-point shot has become an exploit. And I want to point out, Andrew, I don't agree with that either, because teams are losing games and blowing big leads consistently because they don't abandon the three. Right? I don't think it's an exploit at all.
I'd say that it's an exploit until it isn't. Kind of like it's a good idea until it isn't. I mean, I would agree with it in that sense.
Right. And in the majority of the time when I watch, from my opinion, it isn't. He continues, these teams have access to plenty of data about God knows what, and most likely factored in offensive rebounding opportunities, transition points, free throw rate, etc., before committing to shooting as many threes and to play as fast as possible. And I appreciate the point, and I love how in-depth he's going, Andrew. This is awesome from Careless XCI because this is very well thought out. But I want you to empower yourself. What are you seeing? And this is for any fans. What are you seeing, and does it make sense from a basketball perspective, especially if you've played before? It's the same thing with just because they have a title in the front office, just because they're NBA teams. We've talked about how former NBA players sometimes say the dumbest things about basketball. Coaches in the NBA say the dumbest things that make absolutely no sense for the fan base. They do subs that make no sense, etc. Empower yourself. You are okay to critique the product, and you are okay to critique those people. Just like doctors are often wrong, lawyers, there's people in the media who are constantly wrong, who are supposedly experts, etc. A title doesn't make somebody right. And there's also signs of this being a poor idea. The volume of threes that are going up and the way it's being utilized based on the NBA products ratings, based on the success teams are having with that three-point shot, with that strategy, based on the points we've made prior in the podcast. So I'm just saying, I appreciate your point, but empower yourself. It's okay to question this stuff. He continues with that being said, of course, this trend does suck, and it is by far the absolute number one reason why I'm no longer interested in NBA basketball. It would be too much to expect that people from the 70s could have foreseen the monster they were creating when they introduced the then gimmicky three-point line. Also, I think it is far too late now to simply get rid of it, especially because the line has been great for the game up until a decade or two. And I completely agree with that. That's one of my points, Careless XEI. One of my favorite times in the NBA, and I think the sweet spot for the NBA as it relates to the three-point line, and not just the NBA, but basketball in general, the way it's used on all levels, is the late 90s, 2000s, and early 2010s. I think that the three-point attempts to go along with how often people were posting up, how often people were in the mid-range, attacking the rim, the way it made defenses work harder to guard variety, the way it made defenses have to box out, players box out in general, all of that. I think those are the sweet spots. But lastly, he states, but in any case, I don't see how this issue will be dealt with without rule changes. If anything, I think it is more likely that teams will shoot even more threes next season than fewer. So I've kind of given my thoughts on what he said. Definitely appreciate his well thought out response. What do you think, Andrew?
Well, I think he does get at the heart of the matter there, that it is analytics driven. And this is my salty, curmudgeonly opinion, Derek. But when it comes to analytics and algorithms, I do think they are very destructive these days. I think they do stifle creativity and variety, quite frankly, because you are trying to play to a standard. I'm not saying they're not useful. I'm not saying get rid of them entirely. They do have their use in analysis, analytics, and algorithms, and so forth, and it's hard to get away from them. But trying to play to that standard, trying to imitate baseball's Moneyball with basketball, an entirely different sport, is why we have this approach that we have. And I'd agree with him that it's not going to change anytime soon, unless there is some kind of drastic rule change, or for that matter, somebody else comes along with some other kind of analysis that disproves the existing analysis. If somebody comes along and wins a different way, if a team comes along and changes up the strategy and it starts winning 2-3 titles in a row, then it is a copycat league, people are going to start copying that instead, or they're going to at least start diversifying, hopefully, as it was back in the day, is what we enjoyed so much about that game, that there were teams that played different styles, different approaches, and that's what made that era of basketball so beautiful. So I do think it's going to come down to either drastic rule changes, which I'm kind of in two minds about, because how much do you change? Does it come down to then moving the line back or getting rid of that corner three, or this drastic change that has its own drawbacks? Or is it going to be some kind of cultural shift where some other analytics come along and people realize, oh, this is actually an effective way to play. This is a winning strategy. So it's going to have to be maybe a mixture of both.
But Andrew, the analytics, the quote-unquote analysis is so one-sided in this. It's basically all it's saying is threes are worth more.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I've read all the talking points. It's basically numbers nerds out there stating, well, a three is worth more than a two. It's not factoring in everything that I just stated.
Oh, no.
I never hear anybody talk about how these long rebounds lead to easy buckets on the other end.
Well, someone needs to speak
I never hear commentary about how it completely bails out the defense. I've played basketball all my life, Andrew. The easiest teams to guard are the ones who rifle threes early in a possession, the ones who are constantly taking threes. I don't have to work. I don't have to work on defense. All I have to do is stick to my guy outside the three-point line. I don't got to worry about him backdooring me. I don't got to worry about him being physical with me in the post. I don't got to worry about him going to the high post, all of that. All I have to do is deny my guy the ball, and then if he catches it, he's going to try to take a three, and all I got to do is contest him. I don't even have to move much. I got to contest that shot, and then I'm running down the other end. I don't even have to box out. I don't have to do anything defensively. And I'm watching, the NBA today in spurts, right? And I'm watching some highlights. I'm watching the recaps of games and all of that stuff. And it's ridiculous. What I'm seeing is I'm seeing threes constantly go up early in the clock. And I'm seeing defenses not even working hard at all. They don't have to work hard on that possession, and then they're headed the other way. So somebody shared, it was under 2 minutes at the beginning of the fourth quarter, under 2 minute video. And it was Lakers versus Suns. And in under 2 minutes, 8 3-pointers went up. 1 2-pointer went up. All misses. Many of the 3-point shots were early in the clock. Several of them were guarded. And if you watch that video, nobody has to work. Nobody on the defensive end has to work. The offensive players are more often than not just standing around because they're standing around the 3-point line and whatnot. What a piss poor product, right? Like, that is a terrible product. That's why the ratings are so low. That is not true competition. That is not variety. That is not watching two teams go at it. That is watching a chuck fest. That's watching players on a professional level go 3-point line to 3-point line and just jack up threes. 8 threes missed, 1 2 missed in under 2 minutes. And that's not abnormal for today's NBA. So my belief for the reason that the ratings are down is because, yes, there are way too many threes going up. The majority of those threes are misses. Who wants to watch a game that has mostly misses like that? But not only that, it's just the lack of variety in the game and the lack of true competition, right? In the past, what made basketball so fun to watch was to watch teams really go at it, right? True competition, those people battling under the basket, boxing out for rebounds, physicality in the post, going to mismatches, your mid-range specialists and your post-move specialists being utilized, driving kicks to that corner three, people isolating and either taking a jump shot in the mid-range or taking a three. It was the true competition, the physical nature of basketball and all the variety that came with it. And you just don't see that in today's product. I find the product very unappealing as a result. And even Careless XCI, who states he believes he understands the reason they're doing it. I don't. I think it's ridiculous. But he's stating he understands the reason they're doing it, but he can't watch the NBA today, right? Even though he states he understands why they're doing it, he can't even watch today's product. And he's a huge basketball fan.
Oh, for sure. Even if you understand it, you don't necessarily have to like it. And again, it does come down to those analytics. And like I said, it'd be great if somebody spearheads opposite analysis that points out everything that you just pointed out, long rebounds, all the other disadvantages of taking so many threes. The problem is, although this is basketball logic 101, although this is very evident from footage, from analysis from people who've played basketball or watched a lot of basketball or both and know the sport and know strategy and so forth, the stats aren't necessarily there to back it up, or at least not in an easily digestible punch-in-a-formula way like threes are worth more than twos. And that's been a very effective mantra as far as pushing this three-point agenda, has it not? Oh, threes are worth more than twos, therefore threes are a better shot. Now, of course, there is the percentages, the shooting percentages, the shot percentages from outside are lower than inside. That is a pretty good stat to cite here, but somehow that does get lost in the shuffle. But that is the problem, is that people are just looking at the box scores and the efficiency numbers and the advanced stats and the analytics and so forth. I remember a few years back, there were a few people in our community really getting into analytics, and they were really talking up Nicholas Batum. Now, Batum is a fine player. He is also a role player. But they were talking about him like he was a superstar because he had great efficiency. Well, why did he have great efficiency, Derek? Because he's a role player. He's not being asked to take so many shots, to shoulder so much of the load, to play so many minutes, to do all the things Kobe or an MJ or even a LeBron, any star that is going to take most of the shots, that's going to bear most of the weight of carrying that team, not going to do the same things. So of course he's got better efficiency numbers. That's always the way with role players. Well, not always the way, but it certainly is easier for them to be efficient when they're not taking as many shots, not being guarded as heavily, double-teamed, etc. So that focus on those numbers that everybody can understand, that everybody can just punch into a calculator, yeah, it has definitely affected basketball analysis. And people can pick and choose stats. People love to say that statistics are unbiased, but the people who use stats are not unbiased, and they can cherry pick whatever stats make their point. They can pick the range, they can pick the data that will prove their point, and find a way to dismiss the numbers that they don't want to worry about, that they can't counter, quite frankly. So it does come down to analytics. Again, I don't think it will change until somebody with a voice and a platform can push back on the narratives and demonstrate and advocate for that opposite point of view and show their own analytics that disprove the point. I think it's out there, but for whatever reason, no one's interested. They're more interested in going back and, oh, did Michael Jordan really get all those steals in the 1988 season? They're trying to push those narratives and foster a phony GOAT debate, things like that, rather than actually analyzing basketball. So it's tough.
Last few points I'm going to bring up before we get to the community responses. You know how I stated that the average team misses, 24 to 25 threes per game? That means between both teams, that's 50 missed threes or more every single game.
Oh, yeah.
Who wants to watch that?
Yeah.
That's the epitome of chucking. I just want to throw that out there. Who wants to watch 50-plus threes missed per game? Another point. Adam Silver blatantly stated that this is the freedom of movement era, that his goal was to drive up scores, right? That was a Adam Silver NBA goal. But I think a lot of things that have been put in place have to do with that quote unquote freedom of movement direction. And the funny thing is that scores in today's NBA aren't even higher than what they were at points in the 80s, where teams were shooting like 4 threes a game, Andrew, right? We've had these high scores before without the use of the 3-point shot, right? Without bombing away from beyond the arc. It was teams attacking the paint. It was teams getting to the line. It was teams taking advantage of mismatches. It was teams utilizing that mid-range. It was utilizing more of the court overall. And I think that that's missed in this. We've had these high scores before, but without the 3-point shot. Even back then, the defense wasn't handicapped compared to what it is today.
I mean, as I said at the top of the show, even Gilbert Arenas pointed that out.
Yeah, and by the way, I hate Gilbert Arenas as a media mouthpiece.
Oh yeah,
I can't stand him. I think
clock.
he's hurt the sport more than he's helped it. He said some wild stuff related to, disrespecting legends of the past, wildly inaccurate stuff, disrespecting the teams and players from the past. I think that a lot of what he does is to get attention. I think, and it works, unfortunately, and he gets millions of impressions on his content every time he rolls out a new video or he talks on his podcast, etc. So it's hard for me to give him credit with anything. to be completely
well,
honest
like
with
I say,
you.
it's like a stop clock is right twice a day, right? So,
Right, yeah.
that's as far as I'll go. That's as far as I'll go with it.
But, I'm watching some of these matchups, Andrew, and I see, for the Lakers, for example, I see LeBron take a 25 to 30-foot three within the first 5 seconds of the shot clock. Or I see Dalton Connect do the same thing, or Austin Reeves, etc. And I'm watching these go up. Meanwhile, the Suns have a super small ball lineup out there. And Anthony Davis is on the floor and whatnot. And they're taking these threes within 5 seconds of the shot clock, and they're clanking them, bricking them all over the floor. Why don't you put Anthony Davis on the block, Andrew, and take advantage of that mismatch? You think that all of those missed threes, you don't think that a couple of those possessions would have been twos by Anthony Davis? Why doesn't LeBron go downhill, lower his shoulder, and get to the rim for a layup? You're telling me that that's not a higher percentage shot than that contested three Dalton Connect took when he dribbled up the floor and took it within the first 5 minutes of the shot clock? Like, it's absolutely ridiculous basketball. So I don't care that these are NBA coaches, NBA strategists, NBA front office, assistant coaches. I don't care. What I am watching doesn't make sense. And I'm going to comment and critique on that. I also want to point out that I think, and I said it on a recent NLC podcast, gurus have absolutely hurt the sport at all levels. And that's in training. That's in, basketball fundamentals, et cetera, how the game is played. And I just think that it's a trickle-down effect. And I think that this style of basketball and this thought process as it relates to basketball is at our youth level now. And it's, it's at AAU and it's in high school and you see it in college, and it just grosses me out. I just hate what's happened to the sport.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, nba-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
But Andrew, let's get to the community's responses related to this topic. I said, hoopheads, how would you fix the NBA's three-point problem? And I gave them some options. I said, do nothing, it's fine. Or league steps in, league-wide direction change. Or move the line out, or add a 4-point shot, or eliminate the corner three, or put a cap on the number of attempts allowed. So the first response we received is from Roger Ward, so Live 01 legend. He states, I think eliminating the corner three would make the most sense, but it would drastically change the strategy of the game. Moving it back 1 or 2 feet may work too. As I stated, I completely disagree that moving it back 1 or 2 feet would do anything to help the sport, because these players are not even shooting a better percentage today than they did 25 years ago. And I think that they would still be trying to put them up at around the same rate if it was only 1 or 2 feet back, and the percentages would even go down more, and it would further cripple the product. Also, I think corner threes are excellent in basketball. I think that they've always been a big part of the game. I love a corner three when I play. I love it when I'm playing video games, that drive and kick to the corner, etc. I don't think the corner three needs to go anywhere. I think that there are other ways that we can fix this problem, but it has to start at a league direction level. An Adam Silver level. It needs to be a league-wide initiative to mix up the product more and bring back true competition to the NBA. And if that means allowing the defense more freedom, right? Allowing defenses to combat these offensive strategies better, there's got to be a way. As I don't think removing the corner three or moving the 3-point line 1 or 2 feet back is going to fix this problem.
Yeah, once again, I do think it is strategic, cultural. It needs to be pushing back on that narrative, establishing a new one. I understand where the argument is coming from as far as moving the line back or getting rid of the corner three, but like you, I do enjoy three-pointers when they're used efficiently and when it is a great shot and when teams are shooting the lights out and having a great performance, and that corner three is exciting.
The talent doesn't support the amount of threes that are going up now, and they certainly wouldn't support the amount of threes that are would be going up if it was 1 or 2 feet back, or if they added a 4-point line, etc. It's just not there, and it's not smart. It's not a smart strategy. So Rock at Jeff Cortinas states, reinstate hand checking, forces players into different angles, and the offensive player is more tired, which makes it less likely for them to shoot more threes. No more corner three, he states. Why are we rewarding a closer shot with 3 points? 3, he states, heavily penalized 3 points of flops with tech. So I think he's stating that 3-point shooters that flop should get a tech. I've always thought that, especially 3-point shooters that kick out, Andrew, because that's a very dangerous play. I think that obvious flopping should have been receiving techs for a while.
Yeah,
to be honest.
I'm glad they changed the rule as far as kicking out and making that an offensive foul. That's a good move, but I'd be in favor of technical as well.
Yeah, they can go further with that. I think a tech would make sense. He states punish carrying. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And moving screens. I want to point out the carrying thing, which I find is funny. So Anthony Edwards recently, I think it was last night, got called for carrying, and it was an obvious carry. Like his hand went under the ball, then he went through his legs. But he says to the refs, Luka gets away with that all the time. This is 2024. We're calling carrying in 2024. It's like, yes, Anthony Edwards, like me as a fan, like, yes, we are calling carrying in 2024 because technically going by the rules in the NBA, you're not supposed to put your hand under the ball, right? And you did that on that possession. But I do agree with him as it relates to Luka and LeBron and so many players in the NBA now. I see LaMelo Ball do it all the time. But carrying happens all the time in the NBA today. It's a huge advantage to players. And I think that that started in a big way during Iverson's come up, right? I think that the allowance for instances of carrying went way up when Iverson came into the league, and then you saw Steve Francis utilizing that and other players like Baron Davis and whatnot.
And
but in today's the end one style, but in today's NBA, it's as bad as I've ever seen it before. And his last point about moving screens, I talked about this a couple of years ago, and I showed footage of it when I was watching Bucks versus Celtics. I cannot believe the amount of moving screens that are allowed in today's NBA. It's just another advantage for the offense. You can see multiple moving screens on every possession. Sometimes the person setting the screen sliding their feet, or even standing there and then walking in to the person who's trying to get around the screen, and they are almost never called. It is a monster advantage for the offense, and it's something that's not discussed often enough. And like Rock said, he said reinstate hand checking. I think what he's alluding to is kind of what I said a little earlier, is that if there was a league direction and rule changes that didn't handicap the defense as much, that allowed them to be a little bit more hands-on on the perimeter with the offensive player, then maybe it would discourage some of these threes that are going up. And maybe it goes down, 10 to 15 attempts per game, et cetera. So I see where he's coming from there.
Oh, yeah. Andrew Bogut has mentioned that he used to get away with screens when he was playing for the Warriors that he didn't when he was traded to Dallas and later in his career. If they're not calling moving screens, then yes, it is going to make it easier to get open looks. And again, that also feeds into the narrative, so much smarter basketball. They're able to get open looks the way they couldn't with those dumb old players back in the day. Well, if you allow them moving screens as well, they're going to get a lot of open looks as well.
They were so strict about it back then, Andrew. Not only back then in like the 70s, 80s, 90s and whatnot, but even in the 2000s, like Andrew Bogut alluded to. You couldn't get away with that, like when you were Kevin Garnett in Minnesota in like 03, 04, right? Or, in the mid-2000s, et cetera. Like, they would be calling you for moving screens constantly. And that's the way I grew up learning basketball. I am shocked that they allow it so often in today's NBA, but I shouldn't be, because that's Adam Silver's goal, right? Freedom of movement. His goal is to drive up scores and give any advantage to the offense that he possibly can in order for those scores to be driven up. What's funny, like I stated, though, again, is that these scores aren't even higher than what we had in the 80s when like 4 or 5 threes were going up per game. So the other Live 01 legend, Nate Stasio, states, move the line back and eliminate corner threes. But the problem is so much worse. He states, 4 steps, traveling, and carrying stemming from Iverson's influence have irreversibly changed basketball forever. Fundamentals do not matter when the most athletic players can travel whenever because it sells tickets. And I think that the ratings are worse than they've ever been, Nate. I don't think that people are loving this product the same. I know there's always going to be tickets sold and whatnot, but I don't think that traveling is helping sell these tickets. I think that it's hurting the game. I think it's hurting the appearance of the game, the allowance of, 3 steps, oftentimes masked by quote unquote gather step. The constant carrying, the lack of physicality, the moving screens, the 40 to 50, sometimes more missed threes per game. Like, I don't think that's selling tickets. I don't think that's great for the sport. I don't think it's making the sport better or more popular. I think it's hurting it on all levels, including a viewership level, etc. But I agree with your sentiment. I think that this is something that has kind of developed and progressed over time just to be worse and worse. And now we're stuck with what we have today.
Yeah, I mean, freedom of movement. If players can get away with traveling or, hell, not even dribbling the basketball, just let them run around and completely travel. Freedom of movement, why not?
I think one of the dumbest things I've seen is the people state, well, he didn't have full possession of the ball, so he can take as many steps as he wants. Do you remember that play? I think it was Bradley Beal, where he fumbled a pass around the 3-point line and then took like 5 or 6 steps into the paint before he grasped it with both hands, and then he put it up, and they were like, no, that's not a travel. He never had full possession. So you're basically telling me that I can just bobble the ball intentionally with both hands, pretending I don't have control of it in full possession and take as many steps as I want?
Apparently.
Like,
yeah.
Give me a freaking break. So the last response we had on X was Royce. He states, I would say either league steps in or limits the number of attempts. I think the NBA is going to have to do something eventually because of the low ratings and bad reputation the league has gotten. I just think, does every player have to attempt 8 to 10 threes per game? He goes on to state, you will have the outliers and the specialists regardless, but it feels like the entire league is 3-point, quote, happy, end quote, as my grandmother would have said. And everyone is jacking up threes from everywhere on the hardwood. I would like to see a return to real basketball, in my honest opinion. So that's another thing, and I mentioned this on another show. The big guys that they say, oh, well, he's out there shooting threes. He's a 3-level scorer, et cetera. And then you look at their percentage, and they're shooting like 27% from 3. Or they're shooting 31% from 3 or 33% from 3. They're shooting below league average, including Wemby, who is shooting around like between 30 and 33% for most of the year. And all the highlights you saw was of Wemby hitting threes and them stating, oh my God, we've never seen anything like this before. Meanwhile, he's actually shooting below league average from 3 and shooting lower from the field as a result for a guy his size. He's out there shooting threes against guys that are a foot shorter than him sometimes, right? He's not using his size appropriately. He has guys guarding him normally that are 7 or more inches shorter than him, and he's taking step backs and he's shooting contested threes. That is not the best use of his size, and that's not impressive to me as a basketball fan and somebody who's played basketball all my life. I think if he knew how to use his height and maybe put a few more pounds on, he could probably average 10 to 15 more points per game than he does now just by using his size in this small ball NBA. So yeah, I agree. The whole like everybody needs to shoot them. And they're like, and then the evolution arguments where it's like everybody can shoot them, but the percentages aren't showing that, Andrew. The percentages aren't reflecting that. In the, like I stated, the league wide, 3-point percentage per team is the same as it was 25 years ago.
I mean, I remember Manute Bol bombing away from 3-point range and having some big shooting nights from beyond the arc, while also swatting shots like a madman at the rim. Yeah, it comes down to, not only is it boring to see everybody play the same way, but it is ultimately ineffective. and you're not taking advantage of those natural advantages and a diverse skill set. So, no, I'm with you and Royce on this one.
So, Andrew, that's all the responses on Twitter. I believe you received some responses on Facebook.
We did indeed. Alejandro and Martin both talk about the need to have proper defense. Alejandro says, let the defense play some real defense. Some calls are just ugly. And Martin says, bring back hand checking, for starters.
And that's why I stated league direction, right? League-wide direction. That's why that was one of my choices. If you eliminate the whole freedom of movement era, if you eliminate that direction and you allow the defense to, be less handicapped, if you crack down on those moving screens and you crack down on the things that Nate and Roger brought up, the carrying, right, and the traveling and all of that stuff, all of a sudden it gets a lot harder to freely put up these threes, even though they're not even shooting a better percentage. Let's be completely honest with you. It would discourage them from shooting as many, and it might help bring variety back into the game. And it would also help all levels of basketball. As a result, I think you would see a return to that variety and old school style coaching, et cetera, at the youth level.
Great offense, spectacular offense, looks so much more impressive when it has competent, actually not just competent, but in fact fantastic defense to go up against. It's not as impressive when the defense is at such a disadvantage, when you can barely touch the players, when you can't chase them around because of moving screens, when there are so many advantages for the offense. It's not as impressive.
The majority of people want to watch sports for true competition.
Back and forth.
I'll just leave it there.
Yeah. And Renee has a kind of a tongue-in-cheek suggestion, I think. He says, make shots behind the three-point line count for 1 point and make free throws count for 3 points, but only shoot 1 instead of 2 when fouled. Okay, I'm being silly, but desperate times call for desperate measures. However, by implementing this idea, the players would be a lot more incentivized to attack the rim, and post-play would thrive again. I'm sure there's flaws to this, but at least we'll get 90s-style ball back. And yeah, it is obviously kind of a wacky idea, Renee, but I see where you're coming from as far as it being such a desperate situation to get some defense back into the game, to stop this chucking of threes. You almost do wonder, Derek, what kind of crazy idea will work. Do you change the dimensions of the court? Do you move the line back? Do you get rid of the corner three, as some of the suggestions have been thrown out there? Do you change the scoring system? What I hear from Renee's response there is that he too is just frustrated with this style of play.
There is a new rule, Andrew, that they're testing out in the G League right now, and I believe they also tested it out last year. And it is the dumbest thing I have ever heard, I think, where a player gets fouled and they go to the line, and instead of shooting 2 free throws, they only shoot 1. And if they miss that free throw, they don't get any points. Or if they hit it, they get credit for 2. So they hit 1 free throw, but they get credit for 2 points. This reminds me of what they're doing with baseball with some silly rules and trying to speed up the game. Stop this crap. If you get fouled, you should have to go to the line and shoot 2 free throws. If it's a 3, you shoot 3 free throws. Imagine how much that bails out bad free throw shooters. Like, I think this is absolutely ridiculous. So you have a poor free throw shooter, and he goes to the line, and instead of having to make 2 free throws for 2 points, he only has to shoot 1, and if he makes it, he gets credit for 2. If they bring that to the NBA in order to try to speed up the action, that is absolutely foolish and stupid. I think that hurts basketball history as well. But how stupid is that? You go up to the line, you shoot 1 free throw, and if you hit it, you get credit for 2 points. Get that crap out of here. That is so stupid.
I remember them talking about bringing that in and testing that in the G League. I'm at least glad that they're testing it in the G League and not immediately putting it in the NBA, but of course I am wary now that they were eventually going to add it to the NBA as well. And look, I'm not even
they're trying to, listen, they're trying to cater, Andrew, to short attention spans. That's what they're trying to do. They're thinking that every sport needs to be sped up. It's the same thing that's happening in baseball right now with the pitching clock and other rules that they've implemented. What they're trying to do is make the games shorter, right? And they think that that's going to make more people watch, etc. Stop it. I think it's absolutely ridiculous, and all they're doing is hurting sports.
Oh, for sure. And my hot take here is I'm not even a huge fan of the 1-on-1 in high school and college basketball. Actually, over here, playing in the junior leagues, we didn't actually have the 1-on-1 free throw rule. It was just like the NBA, and the NBL for that matter, 2 shots, 3 shots, depending on where you fouled. Of course, 1 for a technical as well. So But I do like that better than what the G League is experimenting with. But yeah, I just like the way the NBA does it, quite frankly.
Yeah, I never minded the 1-and-1 because at the same time, it's still, when you hit the free throw, it's only worth 1 point, right? And
True.
then you got to hit another one.
Absolutely.
And so that never bothered me. And in leagues, like obviously like local leagues that I play in, we still do the 1-on-1 unless a team is over the limit,
right,
etc. But yeah, thanks to the community for all the responses. I think this is an interesting topic, and I just want to end by stating that obviously this is not the only issue with today's product. Obviously, the load management is insane. The amount of injuries in today's game, especially to the stars and key role players, is insane. The moving screens, the fact that carrying and traveling has gotten way out of hand, all of that. There's so many other issues with today's product outside of the 3-point shooting, but the 3-point shooting as it relates to number of attempts, number of misses, all teams playing the same, etc. That's obviously a big problem, and it's worth discussing.
And clearly it isn't just us. Based on these responses, a lot of people do feel the same way. And I would suggest that does prove that it is indeed a problem with the modern game. You also mentioned load management, of course, and shout out to you, Derek, of course, being under the weather this week. But like Larry Bird, who just celebrated his birthday, you won't sit on the bench with no broken fingernail.
Absolutely not. And this is the whole, I bounce my face off the floor and then come back and will our team to victory. Here comes D for 3, I guess. No, this was, I'm glad we were able to record. I am under the weather, but hopefully I'll start feeling better over the next couple of days. I have a league game coming up, so I want to be ready for that.
So you can also consider this the flu cast, Derek, your flu game.
There you go.
Absolutely.
This is my flu cast.
And before we wrap up here, just also want to thank the community. A lot of people have been mentioning, Derek, that we're on their Spotify Wrapped. A lot of people tuning in each and every week, and we're very flattered, very humbled to hear that.
Seeing that we're in people's top 5 related to their Spotify Wrapped, so the top 5 podcasts that they've listened to all year in 2024, it's humbling. I really appreciate our listeners. I appreciate the fact that they tune in week and week out. And not only that they interact, Andrew, right? When I put out a mailbag question, whether it's related to real hoops or the virtual hardwood, many of our listeners jump in and they want to take part in that conversation. So yeah, no, thank you to everybody who listens in week and week out. We appreciate you.
Absolutely. With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. As always, thank you for tuning in, and please join us again next week and every week, as you've been doing, on the NLSC, nba-live.com, our YouTube channel, or wherever you listen to podcasts. In the meantime, make sure you're following us on social media. That's where you can get in touch with us, and of course, stay up to date with all of our content. So Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Yeah, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on YouTube, D43, and on the NLSC, D43.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum, and Andrew NLSC on X. The NLSC is on X and Facebook, at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube, at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep it locked to the NLSC itself, nba-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. So, thank you once again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.